Hey guys, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be factoring trinomials, but we're going to be using a grouping method. Now, in the future, you're probably going to use an easier method, but this will work for all trinomials and you're going to use it a lot in Algebra 2. So that's why we worked on the factoring by grouping yesterday so we can kind of get ourselves set for today's lesson. So before we do that, I just want to recap on the three factoring methods we already talked about. The first one is GCF, where you had either binomial or trinomial, but they all had a certain thing in common. And we used that to undo the distributive property. We factored by GCF to undo the distributive property. The next one we talked about was dots, which is a difference of two squares. And dots was just really a fancy way of doing the undoing just double distributive property. Then yesterday's was factoring by grouping, where we had a four-term polynomial and we grouped it up, factored out common factors, and found our two binomial factors. We didn't realize it, but we technically were undoing the double distributive property as well. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using the factoring by grouping to undo double distributive for trinomial. So we're going to start with something that looks like a trinomial, which is usually a quadratic, and we're going to end up with two binomial factors. Okay? So this is where we start, and this is what we're going to end. But let's just review where it comes from, where we talked about in Chapter 2, polynomials, how to multiply them. So first, let's just review how to double distribute. We set up our tabular method. We label our sides with the two binomials like we did the other day. We multiply to fill in the squares. Then we combined our like terms, which is negative 3x and negative 2x, and we get negative 5x. So that's exactly where we're starting now, is we're going to have our trinomial at the bottom, our answer there, and we're going to factor it back into the two binomials. Okay? So take out today's packet and make sure you have a pencil ready to take down some notes. This is where I'm going to guide you through one example. Then I'm going to stop the video, and then you guys are going to you can either try some on your own or you can watch the guided examples in the next video. So what they're saying here is we're going to factor trinomials by grouping, and we're going to factor the trinomial x squared minus 5x plus 6. So we're going to go through all the steps just to show you, and then you're going to use those steps when you're guiding yourself through the examples. It gets easier with practice, so the more you do, the better you're going to be. It's like multiplication tables and division, long division. You just have to practice it. Okay, so here we go. Your first step, it says step 1 is multiply the coefficient of x squared and the constant. Now, a coefficient is just another way of saying number in front of x squared, which is 1, and our constant is this number. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply that number there and that number there. So we're multiplying 1 times 6. And what do we get when we multiply 1 times 6? We get 6, okay? And that's on the notes. So this is nothing new, but that's where we got the 1 and the 6 from, and how we get our 6 as our magic number. So then we go to step 2, and step 2 is just going to tell us to list all the factors of that product that we just got, which is positive 6. And then eventually we're going to add them together to see which one comes up to our middle term. So first we got to get all of our factors. So factors are two numbers that multiply to 6, which would be 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. But don't forget there's also the negative numbers. Negative 1 times negative 6 and negative 2 times negative 3 also give us a positive 6. So we have to list out both of them because we have 4 options to get our middle number. So now our next step is to add each set. So when we add 1 plus 6, we get 7. And when we add the factors 2 and 3, we get 5. So it's like we're kind of seeing two different things today. We're looking for two numbers that multiply and then they add. Now on the other side, we have negative 1 and negative 6 gives us negative 7. And negative 2 plus negative 3 gives us negative 5. So what our goal is here now is we're looking at that coefficient in front of x, and we want to match up which pair there gave us negative 5. And that would be negative 2 and negative 3 give us negative 5. So that's where we got those boxed off. That's where I'm guiding you through now. Now on to step 3, We're going to use those two magic numbers, the -2 and -3. We're going to separate that middle term, -5x, into negative, so we draw two arrows and we're going to separate it into -2x and -3x. So it's important to make sure you have the signs there and you bring it down with x's next to them. The next step would be to bring down your x and your x squared and your 6. So now we have 1x squared minus 2x minus 3x plus 6. Now this is exactly what we want. We're setting it up so we can group it. So what I'm going to ask you to do is pause the video and make sure you have this down. So now what we're going to do is we're going on to step 4. We're going to use grouping. Grouping, don't forget, is we group the first two numbers together and the second two numbers together. We find our GCF for each of the terms and divide those out. So that's a skill you learned yesterday. So our GCF for the first two terms was x, so we divide x out. And our second two terms was -3 because we had a leading negative, and you always want to factor out a negative if it's a leading negative, and then the number that goes into both 3 and 6. So once we factor out or divide out each of those terms, we are left with x times x minus 2, and then we factor out that -3. That -3 goes here, and then we're divided out. We get x minus 2, so the x went there. And that's what we get as our next step here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is pause the video and make sure you get all those down. And then we're going to move on to the last step. The last step for factoring a trinomial is, don't forget that matching factor comes out in front. And then those two circled terms are the ones that go into our next binomial. So those are our two factors, like we said in the beginning, would be what x squared minus 5x plus 6 would factor into. Now, one thing you need to really understand is that it doesn't matter which way you write your factors. Your factors can either be x minus 2 times x minus 3, or you could put the x minus 3 first and put x minus 2 second. Doesn't matter. It always just matters that you can match it up on a multiple choice question. So what you can do is you can either follow along in the next video to see how we guide you through the next 3 examples, or you can try them on your own and see if you get your answers and check it on the answer key. Okay, so make sure you pause the video, copy the notes down, watch the next couple of videos if you want to see how to get through the guided examples. But your classwork for today is going to be the Google Forms. Okay, good luck.